You can import workforce, but then you import parallel societies, social security problems, and you will spend your money, what you have in the budget, on the semi-successful or not successful integration of the migrant.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm Lukas Degutis and this is our weekly omnibus where we bring you a whole show of everything we've produced this week. Before we get started, let me draw your attention to this week's magazine. Why did voters flock to reform in last week's local elections? Gus Carter introduces Scuzz Nation, Britain's slow and grubby decline. He says it's where decay happens faster than repair, where crime largely goes unpunished, and where the social fabric has been slashed, graffitied, and left by the side of the road. The Spectator shop is open too. You can shop our range of merch just below this video. On with the show. Australia headed to the polls over the weekend, and Anthony Albanese was re-elected as the country's leader, becoming the first in decades to secure a second term. Michael Kroger and Stephen Conroy discuss with Will Kingston.
I will start with you, Michael. Did the Labor Party win this election, or did the coalition lose it?
Yeah, very good question. Predominantly Labor won it, and we partly lost it. So overwhelmingly, Labor won the election because they ran a brilliant negative campaign against the coalition, and the coalition's positive plan wasn't strong enough. So basically, as is the case in Britain with the Conservative Party, our number one brand equity here in the Liberal Party and the national parties in Australia is economic management and tax policy and debt deficit, management of the budget, management of the Australian economy. So effectively, we weren't strong enough on that at all. We had no serious plan for dealing with debt or deficit, no serious policy for reform, change. There was no change agenda. And in the end, we ran on a couple of policies, which was cheaper petrol and $1,200 tax handout next year for people. Well, increase, and that led to our forecast for the next 2 years of increasing the size of the national budget deficit. Well, if you'd said to people who didn't know which party's policies do you think they are, people would probably said, well, I think they're probably the Labor Party, giving away free money to people and increasing the deficit, that'd be Labor. So I thought our tax offering was, an economic offering was very poor and not strong enough to usher you through a whole campaign. On the other hand, Labor ran a very effective campaign, as they do every 10 years, to say that the Liberal Party are going to basically close down the national health system. And people got concerned by that. Obviously, they believed it, as they did in the 2016 election, which was a slight variation of it. They associated us with Donald Trump, said we were, Trump-like, which was a great irony because today our re-elected Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has had a phone call with Donald Trump, who says what a great bloke Albanese was, and he didn't know the opposition leader. And I felt like saying, well, I wonder if Albo told him that one of the reasons he won the election was because he got all these people to say how much they all hated Donald Trump. I don't know whether Albo mentioned that in his call with the president this morning, but that having been said, so they're the principal reasons. Weak policy offering by us on our number one brand equity, and a very strong negative campaign by Labor, which absolutely landed.
Look, I think Michael's summed up a lot of the issues. He's avoided criticising Dutton's actual performance during the campaign, and that's because Michael's a very decent human being. But, we normally say in politics, who won last week? And Dutton didn't win a single week of the 5-week campaign, but it's worse than that. I don't remember a single day that Dutton won. So you might say, okay, he won that day and that day this week, but lost the overall week. I don't remember a single day where Dutton won. His performance was full of stumbles, backflips, disastrous policy announcements that they reversed within a reasonable period. And as Michael said, their tax policies were a shambles. I couldn't tell you how shocked I was, to Michael's point, when you read the fine print of their costings and discovered they were going to have too big a budget deficits than Labor for the next 2 years. So I think Albo came out from Christmas. Paul Erickson, our National Secretary, devised a strategy going forward for the 3 or 4 months in the lead up to the election, and Albo prosecuted it. to the letter. He didn't have during the campaign any stumbles, and one of the great fear behind the scenes was that Albo had done not his best performance in that first campaign. People famously remember he had a disastrous first week, caught COVID the second week, and so there was behind the scenes nervousness. But by the time he got to the campaign, he was bouncing, he was confident, and he barely put a foot wrong for the entire campaign. But one of the other factors that went largely unnoticed was that Peter Dutton was the most unpopular person to run for Prime Minister in a long time. Dutton's rating of -30, the approve-disapprove metric, he was on -30. That was more than Scott Morrison was on 3 years ago. So, Peter Dutton was more popular across Australia than Scott Morrison. And that's a very big thing to say.
Michael, I'll unleash here. I agree with what Stephen's just said, but I also think Albo is pretty underwhelming compared to the Hawks, the Keatings, the Menzies, the Howards of times gone by. I think Dutton was underwhelming. It feels like across the board in Australian politics, we are not producing the types of leaders we once did. I think Dutton is a good political operator. I think Albanese is a good political operator. I don't think either of them are within they're not anywhere near those names that I mentioned before. Why are we not producing leaders like we once did?
No, I think that's quite right. Look, I'm sure Albo's, a good fellow to have a beer with, but you got to remember that up until 6 weeks ago in Australia, Labor were behind in the polls. They'd been behind in the polls for most of the previous year and a half. So the public's view of Albo was this guy is not all that good. I think there was a clear majority of voters in answer to the question, does the government deserve to be re-elected? A clear majority of voters said no in a number of polls, but he got re-elected. So I think a lot of people are turned off by the whole political process these days. And, you're finding it harder and harder to get absolutely quality people. I mean, look, as I said, I'm sure Albo's a nice bloke, but he's not, he's a number 7 batsman. That's what he is. He's not a wicketkeeper either. He's just a number 7 bat who they've sent into open. And, he's run a good, effective campaign, a weak government, but an effective campaign and got himself re-elected.
Well, look, I mean, Michael liked to talk about, the failings of, Anthony Albanese without recognising the other side of the equation, which was just the extraordinarily poor performance and unpopularity of Peter Dutton. I mean, Michael's a polite bloke. He's not going to give Dutton the hard time, but if you're reading the papers in the last few days, people are unloading on him in the Liberal Party about what a shocking campaign it was, how they wouldn't even poll in his own seat because they were too scared to tell him because he'd lose confidence. The pollsters that were advising him it's now been revealed that they weighted it for what was referred to as the voice referendum. I mean, this was a disastrous campaign, disastrous polling giving him advice. And I think one of the other factors, I think Michael would agree, is that Mark Latham and John Howards ultimately voted to abolish the parliamentary superannuation or pension for politicians. And many would argue that since that, you've seen a lower quality candidates on both sides. Obviously, I'll disagree with that on the Labor side. We've got lots of high quality people, but it makes it particularly hard to attract people who earn good money in the private sector. So there's no question I think that is the case. And of course, one of the big problems the Liberals have is attracting women to their party to run. And I know they had one of the better efforts this time to run largely in marginal seats, but there's almost no women left in the parliamentary party, whereas Labor's now hit 50%. And we've now got a far better representation of multiculturalism, male, female. So we've been able to achieve a broad diversity across that looks more like ordinary Australia than the Liberal Party on the other side, which looks largely like particularly older white males.
Well, Michael, I'll continue on this theme because I was reading this morning in the Sydney Morning Herald from Charlotte Mortlock. This election, I believe we had the highest calibre of female Liberal candidates ever. Unfortunately, they were forced to sell a shit sandwich. Does the Liberal Party have a problem with women, and did that contribute to the loss here?
Well, our vote amongst women is always a bit lower than Labor's. Historically, that's always been the case. We had a number of fantastic female candidates that didn't win, including people like Katie Allen in Chisholm. So historically, fewer women have voted for us, more men have voted for us. So make of that what you will. The answer is the surf hits all swimmers. So the tide that hit us hit both the female candidates and male candidates and male members.
What was that tide, Michael? Because sorry to interrupt you, but this is the question that keeps going through my mind, and that is 6 weeks ago, the coalition was leading in the polls, and I was listening to you, I was listening to Kosamaris on Sky News, and around 2 months ago, you were predicting a coalition victory, and the turn was extraordinary around that 6 week mark. What happened?
So Medicare happened. So, as I said, for a year and a half, people thought the government was no good. Labor came out and said the coalition government will privatise effectively the national health. We'll slash and burn funding for the national health system, and the Medicare card, which is our card you go to the doctor with, and which means that a significant proportion of your fee is paid for by the government. That's going to be slashed and burned. Urgent care clinics, which are government-run doctors' clinics, they're going to be closed. They scared the living daylights out of sick people, old people, infirm people, into thinking that under a coalition government, their health care will be sadly diminished. Now, in Britain, how people judge the NHS to be, a great national institution. And of course, Boris Johnson was falling over himself to clap the NHS workers during and after COVID, et cetera, et cetera. And so to say basically that the coalition was going to smash the health system to bits caught everyone's attention.
This has been a scare campaign for 30 years, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes it hasn't. Stephen, do you think that's the reason for why the Labor Party got over the line?
No, I think we play to our brand, which is, Labor created Medicare, Labor will enhance and increase Medicare. And the Liberals, whenever they've had a chance, have nibbled away at it, tried to undermine it. And, Dutton was vulnerable from a period when he was the Australian Health Minister, that he had attempted to make cutbacks. So we were able to exploit that. But I think there's two other factors that Michael hasn't mentioned. I think he got a mention earlier, but the Donald Trump factor was significant. From, I think, really the Zelensky Oval Office disgrace, followed up by, the tariff debacle. The major tariff debacle, captured attention, but in Australia it started before that because they were going to tax our steel. And Dutton made a big play that we're from the same side of the political fence. We'll be able to deal with Trump better. We've got all the connections. And he made a big play of attacking Albanese. And since November last year, the coalition had been cuddling up to Trump, saying how great he was, how his political agenda was so strong, how he defeated the woke debates. And so they really cuddled up to Trump. So suddenly they get this lunatic in the asylum running the US, and everybody is seeing it every day. People are looking at their superannuation pensions, and they're going, the chaos in the US markets, and they're going, oh my God, I've lost $50,000 in 3 days because of that idiot in the US. And the other factor which really, I think, helped Labor was in February there was an interest rate cut. Now, the Liberals had run for years saying 12 interest rate increases, it's all Labor's fault, they can't control their spending, inflation's high because of this. And so the Liberals were pitching backwards. They were saying, look how terrible the last 3 years have been. But that interest rate reduction made Australians think, right, the worst is over. How are we going to be in the next 3 years. And I think the Liberals missed that pivot. And because of that, they were underprepared in policy. And Michael's spoken well about how poor the policy offering from the Liberals was. I mean, they left their defence policy till, a week out. It was their second biggest, monetary offering. They offered $21 billion. And by then, almost half of Australians had voted.
Michael, let's look ahead now for both the next term of the Albanese government and the future of the Liberal and the National parties, collectively the coalition. This is there's no two ways about it. This is a landslide. This is a devastating result. It is the first time there has been a swing towards an incumbent first-term government since Federation. It is an incredible result, particularly given, as I imagine you would agree, Stephen may not, I think the performance of the Albanese government was mixed at best. I would probably say underwhelming. Is this an existential problem for the Liberal Party? We're seeing reform in the UK potentially driving the Conservative Party out. Is there a chance that the Liberal Party is facing extinction in Australia?
No, there's zero chance of that. The history of Australian politics is that we have this discussion every 10 years, usually about the other party. I've been in many discussions over the years where I've been asked, is this the end of the Labor Party? And every few years the wheel turns and it's now always the end of the Liberal Party. No, because the brand equities of the Liberal Party, which are economic management, national defence and security, and thirdly, a more democratised workplace, industrial relations reform, those three brand equities are still very strong brand equities for the Liberal Party.
Michael, are they though? Like, what really has been done by the Liberal Party since Howard on any of those three things? I'm thinking, I can't really think of any great structural reforms in economics. I think, as Stephen said, defence policy came out a week before the election. Industrial relations, everyone's been scared since work choices. What is the point of the Liberal Party today? I'm not sure that brand equity is still there.
Yeah. No, that's a fair question. There will come a point in Australia, there will come a point in Britain, there will come a point in America, there will come a point in every Western country where a leader is going to stand up to much unpopularity early on and say, enough debt is enough debt. We cannot keep driving these countries into debt generation after generation and leave it all for our children down the track, right? Governments now relying on inflation to reduce the value of their indebtedness. These schemes they have in Australia, we have this scheme where you can announce government spending, but because it's considered an investment, it's sort of on capital account, so it's not considered part of the budget profit and loss. So you can hide all these tens of billions of dollars expenditure on this mythical notion that they're going to earn an economic return down the track, so they're not part of a current expenditure. All these funny money economic sort of schemes, these make work schemes, government trying to pick winners. So we've been through this debate for 30 or 40 years. In the end, governments will get hit by the economic reality stick of life. And that's going to hit Australia as it is going to hit America. I mean, they've got 36 trillion US 36 trillion of debt. I mean, how long can this keep going on? So sooner or later, the Liberal Party will come out and say, this has got to stop. They're going to be the adult in the room. And what's happened over the last 10 years here, as it has in a lot of Western countries, is debt and deficit have lost currency as anything that young people need to worry about. There's an endless stream of money to be handed out by governments. Just added to the debt, it's no real problem. No one seems to worry about it, that it will never, ever be paid off in our lifetimes. People think, well, as long as I get something. And then, of course, in Australia, they're told two things. We have this argument that Stephen's mob have, which is the coalition have secret cuts planned for you. So everyone gets scared about all these alleged secret cuts that are coming, which is sort of, another way of saying don't vote for the coalition because your benefits might be taken away. So this is the merry-go-round in Australian politics that we've been going around for more than a decade now, and people are used to getting things from government. They rely on things from government, but sooner or later, a Liberal Party leader is going to have to say enough of this. We can't keep going on driving these budget deficits into record levels. I mean, in Australia, when this fellow Albanese became Prime Minister in the 21-22 budget, our debt here was 895 billion Australian dollars. And in 28-29, it's going to be 1.223 trillion. So it's gone up it's going to go up 328 billion Australian dollars in a 7-year period. Well, that's just unsustainable. I mean, this stuff's unsustainable. Sooner or later, the Liberal Party will come out and take on debt, have the courage to do that, have the courage to campaign against this whole secret cuts notion by saying to people, debt is unsustainable. It's unsustainable in your household. It's unsustainable for the nation. And the public will, in the end, say, right, you're right. We've got to stop this age where everyone thinks the government can hand out money and there are no consequences.
Stephen, I noticed that Michael said at some point in the future, the Liberal Party will start caring about fiscal responsibility again. And that is concerning to me because it implies, I think quite rightly, they don't at the moment. But at the same time, the Labor Party is spending like drunken sailors. They basically bribed their way to this election, paying off university debts and all that sort of stuff in a way that many people would associate with a centre-left government. Why does the Labor Party not seem to care about this fiscal problem either?
Look, I fundamentally reject your characterisation. I mean, Michael makes a point about the size of debt. And all you have to do is go to 2022's budget and get Josh Frydenberg's budget out and have a look at his 10-year forecast for debt, okay? And it was over $1 billion. So Josh Frydenberg, in their last budget, remember they were going to be back in black, okay? The COVID hit. But Josh Frydenberg's own budget forecast this incredible rise, which meant if they'd have won that election in 22, Josh Frydenberg would be dealing with this. So Michael tries to make a point about debt and deficits, which his own party were, I won't say guilty of, because the COVID crisis hit the world's economy. But to try and portray that this is somehow Labor's creation of $1 trillion worth of debt. Now, what Jim Chalmers is correct in saying is we've reduced the level of debt as it was going to be under Josh Frydenberg. So Labor has run 2 surpluses, which Michael just spits chips about. So we've retired some debt. So our trajectory on debt, despite it going over $1 trillion, is lower than Josh Frydenberg's trajectory. That's the first point. And secondly, very frustrating part of the economic debate is the last refuge of the economic charlatan is start quoting numbers that have no meaning. So what I mean by that is you go, oh, the deficit's going to be $30 billion. Okay, this is less than 2%. It's between 1.5% and 2% of GDP. When you see the size of the Australian economy and you put it as a percentage, you realise that having a deficit of 20, 30, 40 billion dollars is really quite trivial in the economic sense when you're measuring it against. But if you're the economic charlatan who's trying to make a political point on the front page of a tabloid, you say $40 billion this year, $40 billion next year. It's unsustainable. It's not. So the idea that being in deficit is a bad thing is a ludicrous notion. If you do it over time and you have no capacity to repay, then a household would have a problem. But governments have the ability to create money, to have the reserve power to increase taxation. And so you cannot measure a household against a government and an economy. They are fundamentally different things. So please, these scare campaigns about, frightening old and sick people, you guys had a picture of a woman a pensioner eating dog food on the front page of, national newspapers. So just stop it.
Michael, it sounds like we shouldn't worry about the deficit. Why are you being an economic charlatan?
Well, because, as we know, Economics 101 says that if you keep increasing the size of the national debt, you increase the size of the national annual interest payments or monthly interest payments, depending on the kind of bond you've issued. and that eats up monies that would perhaps be allocated elsewhere. You can't keep spending beyond your capacity to raise money. And if you keep spending, you have to keep increasing taxes. If you increase taxes, we know what happens. And apart from everything else, the business will go offshore from Australia. We have massively high energy prices here. People will go offshore. Capital's mobile, businesses are mobile, personnel are mobile. So you've got to have a competitive country. At the minute, Australia's becoming less competitive. You know, like the Americans, you know, why is Trump on this Doge train, and why are other Western governments seriously concerned about their debt levels? Was because it's unsustainable. I mean, we've seen what's happened in Africa and South America decades ago, where you have unsustainable debt levels. I mean, you can't do it in a household. You just can't have a credit card that, you know, has no end to it, and governments are no different. So increasing debt year on year, but what's happened, Will, in the Western world is you just pass it on to the next person, the next president, the next prime minister. You just hand this hot potato on to the next one. Let them worry about it. That's been the record in the Western world in the last 10 or so years, and it's unsustainable. That's why we have to worry about it.
I have one final question for both of you. We are recording this from the Spectator offices in the United Kingdom. Most of the people watching this will be from the UK. From both of your respective sides of politics, can UK political parties, the Conservatives and Reform on the right now in the United Kingdom, and then the Labour Party on the left, what lessons can they take from this election? Stephen, I'll start with you. What lessons can the Starmer government take from the re-election of the Albanese government?
Well, look, I think Donald Trump will overhang UK politics like he has Australian and Canadian politics. So I think Keir Starmer needs to be firm. You have to be rude, but you have to be firm that the UK will stand up for its own interests. It won't be bullied by Donald Trump. It's not going to accept his foreign policy edicts where he sucks up to Putin, that the Russians are a serious threat across Europe and NATO is important. And the other message should be, don't be spooked by the economic charlatans who want to talk about the size of British debt and how it's going to cripple the country, etc., as Michael's just tried to do. A measured and balanced response to the state of the economy. I mean, Angus Taylor, this is no joke, Angus Taylor said the way I'm going to fix the deficit and debt is I'm going to grow the economy. Now, fundamentally, I agree with that, but that is certainly not a response that the Liberal Party took any credence of. So first thing you've got to do is not plunge the economy into recession. Absolutely, cutting government, slashing and burning will plunge the UK economy into recession. So he needs to get the right balance between a trajectory towards reducing debt and deficits, but not doing it insanely like the Conservatives would, and have a true sense of what's important. Being in government is about priorities. So Starmer's got to make sure he's got the right priorities, not be panicked by Conservative media, and certainly not be pushed around by Donald Trump on any of these issues. I mean, Trump will try and interfere in UK politics. He's already been barracking Farage. I think there was a little spat recently. He's interfering directly in German politics. It's just don't be spooked.
Well, Stephen's right about one thing, which is the association with Trump hasn't done well for the Conservative Party here, and it won't in Britain. I think Nigel Farage's spat with Elon Musk didn't do Nigel Farage any damage, obviously, by viewing the results on the weekend of those by-elections and council elections. He's got to stand up to Trump on the Ukraine, where I agree with Stephen 100%. I thought Trump's behaviour towards Zelensky in the Oval Office was just appalling. And for the leader of the free world to say he's not on anyone's side, Ukraine or Russia, I'm sort of the umpire in the middle, is a preposterous and outrageous statement to make from someone who is actually the leader of the democratic world. So stand up to Trump on those type of issues. continue to stand up against blatant anti-Semitism, which broke out here in Australia, and which did the Labor government a lot of damage here. They're still elected, but it's done a whole lot of damage to social cohesion in this country. So Starmer's got to continue to stand up to the Corbynite wing and their supporters around the world, around Britain. And finally, I think the great message is, 20 years ago, we had an issue with unlawful boat arrivals. We stopped them under a coalition government. After a bit of time, the Labor Party here agreed with our policies. Now, illegal boat arrivals in this country are almost non-existent. We can see what's happened to the British Conservative Party. Farage is standing up for Middle Britain on that. And the lesson for the Prime Minister there, as we learned 20 years ago, is you cannot have open borders. As much as you have sympathy for those people who have a lesser standing of living than people in Britain, everyone wants to come to Britain, everyone wants to come to America, and everyone wants to come to Australia. It's just not possible. We're not heartless, it's just not possible. And so unless Starmer does something about that, boy, I don't know what you think, but Farage is making huge headway because he's standing up on that issue. And Starmer, if he goes the way of the Conservatives, which was this weak, pathetic response where nothing much happened except voter arrivals increased, Starmer will be out of office sooner rather than later.
Balázs Orbán is Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's political director. He joins Freddy Gray to discuss Hungary's relationship with the EU, migration, and Europe's broken borders.
Yesterday, there was quite a lot of fuss in America about the fact that the Trump administration have launched an alternative to the Drudge Report. And I think a lot of outside observers, quite a lot of inside observers in America, are very struck that the Trump administration seems to be creating its own media channels. It is doing its own media strategy, and it is not just a strategy to work with the media, it's creating its own media reality. And there have been a few often hysterical pieces in America saying they are copying Viktor Orbán's Hungarian government. Are they?
First of all, thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you.
And secondly, I don't think so. I mean, Hungary is a small country. United States is the most powerful country on earth. So I don't see the parallels. Of course, we are happy to see that there is I would call it the national conservative-led government in the United States. And Hungary, we have a national conservative-led government for like 15 years. So we are happy to see that the Western narrative is shifting, and I think that it's easier to cooperate among nation states if those nation states are led by national conservatives government and not by globalist liberals, because if these governments are led by globalist liberals, they push their liberal universalist ideology and they want to impose this on the partners, and that makes international cooperation a little bit harder and not so successful. But the media landscape in every single country is completely different. I understand why the conservative political forces are struggling for a free public sphere, because what I see in Hungary, if I go home, Hungarian language is isolated, only 12 million people speaking Hungarian, but I go home and I do find all of the voices, heavy anti-governmental, heavy critical voices and pro-governmental voices, and I would say the share of these different voices is like 50-50%. But if I go to United States or even here in the UK or other Western European countries, I wouldn't say there is a balance. So there is either 90 versus 10%. 90% mainstream liberal voice, 10% something else. So when a conservative political party or politicians are saying that in the long term this is not sustainable because this is not about democracy, this is not about pluralism, it's about forcefully maintaining a liberal environment where the conservative voices are not heard and also sometimes silenced. This is not sustainable. It has to be changed. So if you need new media platforms to achieve this goal, I think it's a reasonable thing to do so.
I suppose in Britain we have the BBC, which has become the kind of enforcer of left liberal opinion, if you like. Do you think what Hungary's doing is creating a sort of opposite version of the BBC? You are creating platforms through which your government can broadcast its message, which are supposed to have a little bit of distance, but in reality don't.
Well, in Hungary, Fidesz is the political party. There are some media platforms which are supportive towards Fidesz and supportive towards the conservative political movement, and they were not founded like 2 years ago. They were founded like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Because in Hungary, this political landscape didn't change in favor of the liberals only 10 years ago, but after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after the transition period, in many Central European countries, the post-communists, together with the liberals, they took over all the media platforms. And in Hungary in the 90s, there was a very similar situation, what we have now in the UK and what we have now in the United States, that it's not balanced. And Fidesz starting to operate and to create a structure when its voice is also heard way before than it is done now by the British conservatives or the American conservatives. So now I would say we are in a balanced situation where if you are a liberal, your voice can be heard. If you're a conservative, your voice can be heard. If I say something, I'm attacked by the liberals, and hopefully I'm defended by the conservative media outlets, which are all very widespread in Hungary. And this is, I think, a healthy environment from a democratic point of view. And if we have a more healthy media environment in some other Western European and countries and on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, I think it's better for the Western world.
I suppose what I was getting at is you fund them. You fund these organizations, which is you pay for them.
I mean, no. It's like here. There are some foundations. There are some rich people with conservative background who think that this kind of media freedom is important, and they are ready to invest. It's like everywhere the state is supporting all media platforms, but from a state point of view, there is no difference. There cannot make difference between the media outlets. So I would say this state funding system, which is well known in other continental European countries as well, it's neutral. But I'm talking about conservative people and conservative foundations who think that it's important that the conservative voices has to be heard as well. And there is one other issue in Hungary. It's like, and I think it's an important issue for other countries as well. So foreign media intervention on interference. So I think it's a very basic democratic question that is it possible that part of the media in our countries is financed from outside or not, or it should be financed by domestic actors because it's a sovereignty question. So I cannot imagine that most of the media in the United States is financed by Russians, or in Russia, most of the media outlets is financed by Americans. So this is not something which could happen. But in small Central European countries, after the transition period, it was different. So many of the media outlets were financed by foreign donors, which is... it can be an interference on the democratic electorate system. So what we see is that it doesn't matter whether a media outlet is liberal or conservative, but what is more important, it has to be domestic.
Yes.
And that's then more democratic than if it's influenced from outside.
Well, you talking about foreign donors, and we're talking about America there, makes me think about probably the most famous foreign donor in the world, who is Hungarian-born, George Soros. I'm struck by how it's become very, very part of the American political conversation now to talk about Soros. Elon Musk talks about him a lot. Other Trump administrations freely say that district attorneys are Soros-funded and so on. How much of this is true and real? How influential is George Soros in global politics, and what does he really want?
I think it's true, and it's real, and he is very powerful. There was an article in the Financial Times, which was made not with him but with his son, Alex Soros, and he was openly saying why I should be a state secretary, because I'm more powerful like this than going into the administration. And it was very outspoken, but I think he is right. So he has its own money. He has his political agenda. He has his network, and this network, through think tanks, through academic institutions, through media outlets, pushing forward the agenda of the so-called open society, and going against governments which are on the other side. So they are protecting national sovereignty, protecting borders, and protecting like common sense. I would call it that way. So, and it's an ongoing fight, and I think it's a serious issue in the United States. It's a serious issue in many big countries. But imagine what one person can do in a smaller country.
Yeah.
So with that amount of money, and this is happening in Hungary. So we are fighting for our sovereignty against these foreign-funded Soros networks. Mainly, they were funded by the Open Society Network, but also as it became obvious during the new administration, partly it was funded by United States, USAID.
Yes.
So they spend the American taxpayers' money on financing liberal opponents of national conservative government in Hungary and elsewhere. So I think it's a big corruption scandal, and it's serious. And we on the conservative side, not just in Hungary but in other countries, we have to push back.
Yes, and you mentioned about how they have established networks. So the Open University, Open Society institutes everywhere in most countries. I think they've now left Hungary. Is that right?
It's a little bit more complex than this. The problem is that the problem with these billionaires, that they have the money to influence politics, but it's much better if government money is spent in their names. Yeah. So they had a very good system in the USAID and under the Biden administration. The Trump administration cut these fundings. But what they do now is that they want to use the Brussels funding structures to step in and to support their activities. So unfortunately in Hungary, the fight is not over, because the Brusselian supranational institutions are actually supporting media outlets, NGOs, think tanks, and also political movements on the liberal side against the conservatives. So it's like, I agree with you that from an American point of view, things are much better than it was a couple months ago. But from a European point of view, from a Brussels versus member states point of view, things are getting more heated.
And the arts too. I mean, Soros has been very involved. The Soros empire has been very involved in funding the arts, cultural institutions, and so on. What I wanted to ask him, the first question is why? I think one can get very carried away with, demons, and you get a lot of this sort of talk, and it does veer into anti-Semitism. I'm not accusing. I know the Hungarian government's been accused of that a lot, but I think it can easily swap in for a kind of anti-Semitism. What do you think the Soros network wants?
I think the changing point was the migration crisis in 2015, when from one day to another, what we experience is that we have a southern border, and then through that border there are just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of illegal migrants who want to come in and go across our country without any kind of permission or reasonable argumentation that they have the right to do so. And from a national interest point of view, it was obvious that if you want to maintain law and order and protect your citizens, you have to be able to defend your borders. And then we started to build the fence on the southern borders. And then George Soros himself wrote an article that we need immigration, we need open borders. Europe needs 1 million newcomer per year. It was 2015. Since then, we had 9 million. In 9 years' time, we had 9 million newcomers. What a coincidence! So I'm not pushing conspiracy theories, but these are just facts. So and they were saying openly that those governments who are opposing open borders, they are political enemies, and they should be cornered. They should be put under heavy pressure from the transnational institutions. And my prime minister was under heavy pressure for like years, just for defending the national borders and maintaining sovereignty and law and order in our country. And that was the turning point. Then we realized that it's not just a political disagreement, it's about the survival of the nation. And what they are doing is they don't want, because the Hungarian society, I would say, is united. So even those who disagree with Fidesz, I'm talking about the grassroots voters, they say that every single country should be able to defend its borders, and that's the government duty. And so I would say there is a national unity in Hungary about the migration issue, and these billionaires with their money are trying to undermine the democratic will of the people, and this is something serious. And of course, there was some clash points after it. The woke agenda was one serious clash point. This entire open society universe is pushing forward the woke agenda in every different form. We organized a referendum in Hungary where we asked the people whether they want this woke agenda being visible in schools and kindergartens, and it was totally rejected by them. And the third point was the war. In Hungary, we are, of course, we know that the Russians attacked Ukraine and they violated international law, and from a humanitarian point of view, we support the Ukrainians, but we see this as a terrible war which should be end as quickly as we can end it. And so we have a peace strategy and a peace kind of mindset. And we were, by the Biden administration and by the Soros network, under very heavy pressure for having this opinion, which is also widely shared by the Hungarian voters, not just the Fidesz voters, but the majority of the society. So these are the most important clash points, I would say, and it's still a clash point.
I want to talk about Ukraine a bit, and I don't mean to focus on Soros because I think probably far too much energy is spent talking about Soros, but I do want to just keep on going. You talk about billionaires there. What do these globalist, if you like, internationalist billionaires want? Is it cheap labour through immigration? Is it among a certain milieu of the billionaire class that they loathe nationalism instinctively? I mean, someone like George Soros, again, to go back to him, people say he's sort of Marxist. I don't think, from my understanding of him, he thinks of himself as a Marxist at all. He thinks of himself as a liberal.
Yeah, globalist liberal. I agree with you. So I think that these people see old form of Western societies and the Western states, this nation-state format, as an obstacle, as a problem, as an outdated concept. So they want a global world where there are no nation states and national identities and traditional cultural identities in general, and where we have open borders and they can make business freely. And if somebody is not allowing them to do their business, then they have the power to destroy it. And that's their worldview. And everybody who is saying that, look, guys, we understand that it sounds to be a very good idea, but in reality, what we see that people are suffering because nation state is the only concept which helps a community to thrive and to be protected. So we need the idea of nation states and national sovereignty if we care about what's happening with our people, because no one else cares. The globalist institutions don't care about these small communities who are national communities who are living in UK, living in Hungary. So we need the concept of nation state, borders, national sovereignty, and these concepts are not outdated ones. Actually, these are the most important principles which can guarantee the survival of our nations, even if the 21st century will be a little bit shaky because great power rivalry is going on, new technologies, global challenges, and so on. So we will have a very serious century. But if we want to survive as a nation, then we have to stick together. And it's not an outdated concept. Actually, it's a modern answer and an effective answer to the modern challenges. I think this is where we have the major disagreement with the globalists.
Well, on Ukraine, I know that the Hungarian government's position on Ukraine is often caricatured as being pro-Putin and so on. But it is undeniably true that if you believe in borders and the nation state, a lot of Ukrainians feel they have a nation state and their border has been quite seriously transgressed. If you really believe in those things, there is a pretty good argument to be made from a Western perspective that we do need to help Ukraine fight Putin, push him back as much as we can.
I agree with you, and the Ukrainians have every right to defend themselves. But the question is, what's the reality now? And my prime minister, when he was the president of the European Council last year for like 6 months, he made the so-called peace tour or peace mission. He went to Kiev, went to Moscow, went to Beijing, met with the NATO leaders, and went to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump. And then after that, he put together a report where he informed all the European leaders, and he was saying that the two parties who are in this war, so the Ukrainians and the Russians, for different reasons, but they think they don't want to stop fighting. They want to keep fighting on both sides. So and there has to be an outside neutral mediator who try to end this bloodshed. And United States, there will be a leadership change. And if it happens, then the Americans will walk away. And we Europeans will be left out with this very horrible situation. And in the same time, there are just on a daily basis hundreds and thousands of people are dying. So what he was proposing is that the things are changing and Europe should move, and the quicker we move, most probably we will have the chance to secure our own position as well. Unfortunately, it turned out, it turned out to be true that this is exactly what is happening. The West lost this war. The Americans are walking away, and we Europeans are stuck miserably together with Ukraine, and still we think that the sooner we get the peace, we get closer to finishing these conflicts. The sooner we are able to go back to the diplomatic tables, it will be better for Europe and for my country, which is also suffering from the high energy prices, from inflation, from high interest rates, and so on and so on. So this is our position. We know it was inside the West a minority position. Now, since we have United States, it's a majority position even inside the West, and outside the West, everybody thinks the same. So I'm a bit disappointed that I still feel that there are some European forces who are willing to keep pushing the fight for no strategic reasons.
Yeah, they're quite happy to let a lot of people die with no clear purpose, for no clear purpose.
I agree with you.
Yeah. I suppose what a lot of the debate about Ukraine boils down to in Britain, the debate is sometimes a bit mad, but it boils down to, what do we think Putin's Russia wants? What do we think Vladimir Putin wants? Do we think he is seriously a revisionist force? Is he seriously expansionist in his aims? What does the Hungarian government think?
Well, when I always had a debate with those who were just arguing in favor of the current Western or European strategy to have a kind of a proxy war, support the Ukrainians, and this is how to corner and push back the Russians. And they were always saying in the same sentence that Russia is too weak to occupy Ukraine. And at the same time, in the same sentence, they were saying that Russia is an existential threat on entire Europe. So I was telling them that, you know, they can choose.
Can't be both.
But can be both.
Yeah.
You have to choose. Either it's too weak or it's an existential threat. So I think it's now Russia. We have our history with Russia, which is not a very nice history, as you know. But I think that the Russians are not irrationals, they are hyper-rationals. So they wouldn't dare to attack NATO and the NATO countries. So what we can do is and what we should do is to find a long-term agreement, not just about Ukraine, but about what will happen and what should be happening between NATO and Russia, because we have to solve this problem, because in the last 30 years the tension was growing and growing, and there is a circle of escalation which is quite dangerous. And with the lead of the Americans now, I hope that there is a time that we can find a long-term strategic solution and agreement between the Western world or the NATO countries, whatever, however you want to call it, and Russians. And this is what we need for having a long-term sustainable peace. And I'm quite frustrated to see that many European countries are now not supporting the American position, which is the first reasonable pro-peace position for a long time, but they are actually on a daily basis trying to undermine the efforts of the Americans. And this leads us nowhere, and this war is destroying Europe, destroying its competitiveness, destroying the low prices, destroying its companies, destroying its global position for nothing. So again, the sooner we are able to close it, which is not going to be easy, but the sooner we are able to close it, it will be the better for everyone. And
do you think, you say Russia wouldn't attack a NATO country, do you think Russia would attack a European Union country if Ukraine were included in the European Union?
Well, so what we see is Ukraine is in a complicated position because Zelensky and his government was telling to the Ukrainians that if you are fighting, you get NATO membership, which the Americans made it clear that it's not going to happen. There will be no NATO membership. So what can they offer? How they can explain why this fight was for EU membership? But my problem is, like, if we put together the numbers, the reconstruction of Ukraine, actually the annual funding an annual operation of the Ukrainian state, which is not it's not sustainable. The integration process into the economic system, it costs a lot of money, and Europe cannot afford it, because we have to rearm ourselves, we have to support our own economy, and we don't have the money which is needed to do so. And this is why we Hungarians were realizing that the Brussels elite is trying to give a fast-track EU membership to Ukraine. And I think it's an existential question and a strategic question for every European nation, whether they want to take this burden, which is called financing and rebuilding Ukraine, or not. According to our calculation, if Ukraine comes in, all the other member states are becoming net contributors. So this is a big change, and this is just parts of the financial things. There is the agriculture, the cohesion policy, the size of the country, the free movement of people, the arms, the mafia, and so on. So it has a strategic impact on the future of European Union. So what we decided in Hungary is that we organize a referendum and ask the opinion of the Hungarian people. And there is this referendum campaign going on, whether they support EU accession of Ukraine or not. And what the Hungarian government will do is like to represent the will of the Hungarian people on a European level. So if they say no, I'm expecting heavy turbulence.
Yeah. Well, speaking of heavy turbulence, in Britain, obviously, we're no longer part of the European Union. And if you talk to British conservatives, British people who supported Brexit, a lot of them will say we tried to change Europe from within. We tried to steer Europe in a different direction. It seems to me that's what Hungary's doing at the moment. If you can't, can Hungary be part of the European Union in the future?
I hope so. Being a member of European Union is important for the Hungarian voters. They feel that, we are in the middle of Europe. You are an island next to the European continent. But we Hungarians are in the middle of Europe. We were fighting for Europe against the Turks, for example, in the medieval period of time. So it's decoded in our cells. And from an economic point of view, the single market is also very important for us. So I think the only chance we have is to reform the European Union from within. We cannot do it on our own, so we need allies. That's true. But I think one thing changed since the Brits decided to leave, which is their sovereign national decision. We Hungarians are disappointed because we had a good ally inside. So it was always a lot of pleasure to fight together with the Brits against the Federalists. But now we are doing it on our own. But I think the situation since the Brits left became much worse than it was before. And I think there must be an awakening period, because even the Federalists are saying, whose goal is to create a transnational superstate, they realize that they got all the tools, they have all the institutions, they control everything, and European economy and the European continent is going down, not going upward, it's going down. And so something has to be changed. And those new leaders who are coming in after the elections, they all are representing a different way of understanding. Of course, the big turning point would be a new sovereigntist leadership in France or in Germany, so in the big countries. But we have a sovereigntist right-wing leadership in Italy. Central European countries are quite like-minded. in that sense. And I think at the end of the day, this reality that if we go into that direction and we give more power to the supranational institutional leaders, they will destroy everything. This is what happened in the migration issue. We gave them power and they wanted to destroy our society. It happened with the climate policy. We gave them power and they mismanaged the transition period. This is what happened with the war. They required power on the sanctions regime, energy regimes, and what happened? Sanctions are not working. Energy prices are skyrocketing. So it's like there will be an awakening where people will realize that if we want to have a future for the European project, then we have to change the course, because otherwise these tensions which are inside, and these are not about Hungary, it's about the global position of Europe. These are just realistic concerns, and we need to find proper answers to that. This is my hope.
If you look at what's going on in America, the tariff, Liberation Day, Trump's tariffs, and the tremendous convulsions they caused in the financial markets, it's impossible to achieve what the Hungarian government's trying to do, or what perhaps Donald Trump's trying to do, without causing severe stress and strain, I think, to potentially people's livelihoods and so on. Is this where, whatever you want to call it, national conservatism, that's where national conservatism is always going to come up against a serious obstacle, which is people don't want to imperil their financial situation. They're quite happy to support anti-immigration policies or policies that restrict immigration. They're quite happy to support patriotism, I should say. But when it comes to, this could mean I'm out of a job, or this could mean, we have a serious recession, then they panic and they backtrack. And we saw it a little bit with Trump and the election of Emmanuel Macron, who pitched himself as the anti-Trump and so on.
We will see. What our experience is in Hungary, that if you want to lead a successful national conservative movement, you have to be successful in economic terms as well. So in Hungary now the situation is not easy, but we in the government had in the budget had the maneuvering space enough to introduce the newest elements, for example, of our family policy. So from next year, mothers with 2 or more than 2 children will not pay any income tax for their life. So zero income tax for mothers with 2 or more children, and I think that's an innovation. It never happened in any other country. But if we want to support families and support mothers and decrease the taxes and show that to the ordinary people that it's worth, it's a good investment to support the national conservative forces, we have to give them some financial backing as well. For example, in Hungary, we have the lowest energy prices for households, which is a consequence of our policy. We need energy. We are ready to cooperate with everyone based on our national interest. We don't want to bring morality into or geopolitical concerns. So I think these are the economic elements of national conservative movements as well. We have full employment in Hungary. There is a public work program, so it's not a welfare society, it's a workforce society. You get support from the government to either to go to the public work program or after it to find a job on the labor market, but not being in a welfare system. It was very controversial at the beginning, but people understand that the society and those who are capable of working, they need to work, because otherwise the entire nation will go down economically. So I think there are some very important economic elements of this national conservative movement as well. And I hope that we will see some elements of it in United States of America as well. They started to talk about fighting against inflation, supporting families in financial terms. So I'm expecting more and more measures or ideas like this are coming up.
Yeah. Well, natalism is a big part of what your government is doing. And it looks like you've had success in terms of the birth rate to a certain extent, but it's difficult. I mean, the Trump administration talking about a baby check. It's thought that doesn't really work. You talk there about no income tax for mothers, but then does that mean that fathers increasingly do the childcare? Is that the model you're trying to support? It's not an easy policy to create or to implement.
No, it's not an easy, but we spend around 6-7% of our GDP on family policy issues, and it's about tax exemptions, it's about special loan programs on housing, it's about childcare system, improving it, and what we see is if you invest in it, it's starting to work. So the number of marriages went up, number of divorces went down, number of abortions without changing anything on the regulation went down. The fertility rate went up. Unfortunately, the situation around us, it's horrible in the neighboring countries. So in 2010, the Hungarian fertility rate was the lowest in Europe. Now it's the second highest, but it's still not enough. If you want sustainable population, you need 2.1 fertility rate. Now it's only around 1.5. But there is a kind of increase, and I think that's the only way to go forward, because what was proven in the last decade that mass migration is not a solution. You can import workforce, but then you import parallel societies, social security problems, and you will spend your money, what you have in the budget, on the semi-successful or not successful integration of the migrants. We don't want to spend our money on integration. We want to spend our money on supporting Hungarian families. And if you formulate the question like this, and I think this is the proper way how it should be formulated, then the answer is clear. You have to support the Hungarian families, not the integration of the migrants.
And another thing that Hungary has been doing is supporting Christianity. And that is something that makes European liberals very anxious, because they think that the public square should be secular, and so on. How much does your idea of conservative nationalism go hand in hand with Christianity? Is it the basis of it all?
I personally think that our civilization is based on the Judeo-Christian heritage. So if we kick this thing out from the public sphere, then there is nothing what remains. So and without identity and without culture and without points of cohesion, it's impossible to sustain a society. So we need Christianity, Christian theology, Christian philosophy, Christian church. But what we're doing in Hungary, we protect freedom of religion. We also protect the idea of separating state from churches. But in the same time, we are saying that if churches are deciding to have a role in a public sphere, for example, in healthcare or in education, that the state should supporting them, because what they're doing is important for the state, for the society, for the future generation. So we created a very unique system where in Hungary the state and the churches are separated from each other, but they are cooperating on these important social issues. And also in the foreign policy, we added one unique element, the support of the persecuted Christians. And in our eyes, it's linked to migration as well. So why Western countries spend a huge amount of money on inviting these migrants and trying to integrate them into their society, and why don't they just give that amount of support to the local communities, those Christian communities and other communities, to stay there and to establish a life. And I think if we have Christianity in the Middle East, if we have Christianity in Sub-Saharan Africa, and we have Christianity in those regions which are under heavy pressure by the demographic boom, it would serve the interest of the Western countries. So we should do more to support those persecuted Christian communities, because they are a stabilizing effect in these very unstable regions.
Balázs, I know you've got to go soon, but I just wanted to ask you before you left. You've been in Britain for a few days now. We've obviously had these local elections. Reform have done extremely well. The established political parties are really struggling. What's your impression of the mood, the political mood in Britain at the moment?
Well, honestly, I'm a big fan of United Kingdom and London, and I'm coming here for business, think tank exchange, intellectual exchange for like more than a decade. And in the last years, I had the feeling when I talked to British conservatives that, we don't find a common language. So the problem is either with me or with them. So there was a kind of a mismatch. Now it is the first time when I came back, and I have a completely different feeling. So I understand them, and I hope they understand me. So there is a matching, and there is a common language, which is, I think, it's very good, because for the national conservative movements to cooperate on an international level, it's always harder than do it by the liberals, because the liberals, they are universalists. So if you are a liberal in Timbuktu, in London, in Washington, in everywhere, you have the same ideas. If you are a national conservative, all your ideas are based on your national identity, which is rely on your history, your geography, your socio-cultural background. So there will obviously be points where there has to be some kind of disagreement. But the question is, what is the civilizational background you are fighting for? And I think Anglo-Saxon British conservatives and Central European conservatives are starting to realize that we have to be ready to fight for our families and for our nations. And it's much better to do it on an international scale than to remain isolated from each other.
Conflict is escalating between India and Pakistan. BJ Sadiq and Freddy ask whether all-out war is inevitable.
First of all, give us a sense of the mood in Islamabad, the sense of political tension and so on.
Yes, as we talk, there is a state of panic across the country, and I'm sure across Pakistan, and I'm sure the situation is not any different in India, as ordinary civilians are likely to go into panic buying, doing their groceries in a rush, as fears of a deadly war and a prolonged war grow. Mind you, both these countries have not had an extended military conflict since 1999, when they fought in the snow-laden mountains of northern Kashmir. So the mood is not looking very promising. There's something, there's tension in the air. Schools in Pakistan, as we speak, are closed, and government offices are open. But in case there's even the slightest of escalation, the entire public and private sector machinery will also be shut down.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has promised that this escalation will not go unpunished. What would that realistically mean? India is insisting that these strikes are non-escalatory. I imagine the Pakistani side think that's quite rich of them to say. But what do you think is likely to be Pakistan's next move?
Well, Freddy, it all started last night around 2 a.m. when India launched what it is calling, as you rightly said, Operation Sindoor, which roughly translates to vermilion in English. striking 9 sites inside the Pakistani-administered Kashmir and some areas in Punjab, including border cities like Sialkot, cities like Bahawalpur and Muridke, which are all in Punjab. Now, this is an international border that India has breached. It is no longer a threat. We are officially, and that's the mood, not just of the among the civilians, but also among in the Pakistani establishment, that we are officially in a state of war. The Pakistani establishment, and mind you, when I say Pakistani establishment, I'm talking of the military establishment. That's the moniker that we use, confirms that 26 people have died due to these strikes by Indian forces, and over 40 people are badly wounded. There was a mosque in Bahawalpur, which is in the southern Punjab, close to the Indian border. It was demolished by a missile strike. India says that it had attacked a terrorist hideout, whereas the people killed were not terrorists. The victims include a 3-year-old girl who's dead, and 2 people are very brutally wounded, who were just going about their life. So Pakistan, in the early hours of Wednesday, claims to have shot down 5 Indian aircrafts and have also taken a few Indian soldiers as prisoners. And there's been heavy shelling across the line of control, which separates the Pakistani administered Kashmir with the Indian administered Kashmir. Now, Indians claim that the nature of its attack was non-escalatory, which is foolish because ordinary people have been killed. Now, they also may say that this was all a result of a terrorist attack within Indian Kashmir over 10 days ago. You might have heard of it, the Pahalgam incident, which is a very lush tourist spot in India, in Indian Kashmir, very popular among the locals, and where more than 25 people were killed by terrorists who had links with Pakistan. And this is what I'm giving you their version. Now, as of today, the Indian authorities have failed to produce satisfactory evidence. They also won't allow independent inquiry by the United Nations and other international watchdogs. And doing something like this, an international inquiry, an independent inquiry, where free press is brutally suppressed, doing something like that in Modi's India is next to impossible. So this had all the hallmarks of we haven't had a direct military conflict with India in over nearly 3 decades. So this has all the hallmarks of a serious not nuclear, maybe it's too early to use the word. It's even horrible. It sounds horrifying to even just to use that word, but a proper, full-scale military deadly conflict.
You mentioned that Pakistan's establishment is in many ways the military, and the head of the army now is General Syed Asim Munir, who is, I believe, the most powerful man in Pakistan at the moment. And he seems to be rather more belligerent, supported as he is by the Sharif brothers, rather more belligerent than Pakistani public figures have been in the past, and rather more public than heads of the army have been in Pakistan in the past. His response is presumably vital, and so far he seems to be keen to ramp up the conflict, not to ramp it down. Am I being fair?
You are being fair, yes. But they've claimed to shot down 5. There are, various reports are stirring from the social media. People are reporting that there's a likelihood of India striking more cities inside Pakistan, possibly somewhere near the capital where I am right now, or possibly in Karachi, which is the southernmost city, which is the port city and the financial center. So there are reports like that. So I think his response, if it's aggressive, is grounded in the kind of reaction that Modi's India is showing towards Pakistan. So yes, you're quite right.
Am I right to say that since Imran Khan, who you've written a book about, has left the political front lines, Pakistan has become more publicly antagonistic towards India?
I wouldn't say India is Freddy. India is the least of our problems. We have so many other problems. I mean, we cannot afford a war with India. We are a country of 240 million people. We are in debts. We have we have troubles with Afghanistan. We've had troubles within the country. Democracy is not taking off. There are socio-economic problems. So I would, in my independent and honest opinion, we do not want an escalation with India. It's, right after Pahalgam incident, it was the Indians who started threatening Pakistan with war. Well, no, I'm not a big fan of. Let me be very clear. I've not been a big fan of my own armed forces. I've been quite an equivocal critic. But in this situation, when it comes to foreign policy with regards to India, I think I would stand with the military right now, the way they are reacting, because we've not been, it seems as if we've been pushed to the wall and we're not left with many options. Pakistan, um, right after the Pahalgam incident, India, I would call it Modi's India, because India is a very large country with, it's a supposedly a pluralistic society with so many other different. It used to be a wonderful society before Modi came. So they've started threatening Pakistan with war, and this is something that Modi has done over the last decade. And right after this incident in Kashmir, uh, they've deployed various strategic tactics like the suspension of the critical Indus Waters Treaty, the cancellation of visas, and the downgrading of diplomatic ties. India has also shut down its main border crossing with Pakistan and ordered Pakistanis on certain visas to leave within 48 hours. Now, to answer your question, the blockage of Indus waters worries Pakistan, because because the Indus waters, the Indus River, the mighty Indus River, is the country's largest source. It is the source on which our agriculture depends. The treaty, which was brokered by World Bank in 1960, has endured full-scale military conflicts and diplomatic breakdowns over the years. Its suspension is unprecedented and marks a major turning point in an already troubled relationship between these two nuclear armed neighbors. So, any interference by India in the river's flow could have immense consequences for Pakistan, including lower crop yields, rising agricultural costs. Now, in a situation where Pakistan is already battling uh, insane levels of inflation and and agreeably a recession-like situation. Anything like that happening would completely destroy the very fabric of our socio-economic, structure. So, military intelligence of Pakistan has been preempting an attack like this for over a week.
And India, on the international stage, India enjoys considerably more diplomatic leverage, certainly with Western powers, than Pakistan does. The Trump administration seems to be particularly close to India. Vice President J.D. Vance was there only a few days ago. And the Trump administration is hoping to soon announce a big new trade deal with India. And indeed, Britain yesterday announced a very big new trade deal with India, and that's the Labour government, whereas we normally think of the Tory government, the Tory party, being a bit closer to Modi's government in the past for various reasons. How does Pakistan stand up to that sort of level of Western support for India, even if India does seem to be the aggressor in many ways?
India is using its recent, resurgence in the global politics, considering that it is a big trade power now. It is using that, it is leveraging all that privilege to knock down Pakistan. That is how I see it. And considering that there has been a shocking rise of the far right in India, and more pronounced over the last decade under Modi's premiership. India today is not the India of the past, not the India, more than the economic power. And when we talk about economic power, it's not. It is a certain section of society that is reaping those benefits. If you dig deeper, there are problems that India is suffering. It's not in their interest to go with war, to attack Pakistan or to go to war with us. It is not the India of plurality anymore. It is the India of not the India of religious tolerance anymore. Modi has buried all of that. So quite right. There are trade deals happening with European powers and the US. Pakistan has enjoyed a relationship with the US as well. In many ways, the military was built up by the US during the Cold War, but now considering its economic situation is precarious and India has taken off, it will do all in its power to leverage that opportunity.
What India claims, and quite a few Western analysts claim this too, and I don't think they're all biased against Pakistan, is that Pakistan operates as a sort of deep state, a military deep state, and that the Pakistani military, while in many ways clamping down on terrorism in Pakistan, also has occasionally turned a blind eye to terrorist groups who might serve their interests, and that is what India thinks is happening in Kashmir. How much truth is there in this idea that the Pakistani army, the Pakistani government has tacitly supported terrorist attacks that it regards as useful?
Freddy, I think this is an old rhetoric. Why I say that? Because after the 2001 terrorist attacks, the 9/11 terrorist attacks, there has been a drift. There has been a change in Pakistan's foreign policy towards India, because we've been so busy fighting terrorists in our own backyard. So opening another front on the eastern borders would not serve our purpose, and that is how I see this situation. So India is operating under a very old rhetoric. Kashmir, is a large Muslim state. If you look at the history of the region, it was taken by India through military force in 1947, and they were promised a plebiscite according to a UN resolution, but it never happened. So there has been an immense lingering resentment within Kashmir, and since 1989, hundreds of thousands of Kashmiris have been killed due to insurgencies which are entirely homegrown because of Indian aggression, because of Modi's Hindu supremacy. There's a certain pattern to Modi's. If you want, I can talk about it. I can go on and on about what Modi has been doing to Muslims and to minorities and to Muslims in Kashmir. And I believe that the recent insurgencies which have taken place over the last 10 years or 20 years are a clear result, a clear product of that behavior, that attitude towards the Indian minorities.
Well, I quite understand. I visited Pakistan a few years ago, and I saw for myself the extent to which the Pakistani army has taken on terrorism within Pakistan, near the Afghanistan border and elsewhere. And that's come at a huge cost in Pakistani lives, is it not? I believe some 70,000 troops. So presumably it's quite offensive for fair-minded Pakistanis to hear that their government, their country is a sort of harbouring terrorism.
Of course, when an average Pakistani, somebody like me, free thinkers, relaxed about religion, we don't want war. We want education for our children. We want to go out and have a nice, peaceful life. And it is quite a nice, peaceful life, contrary to what majority of Western media thinks it is. It is quite a liberal and a relaxed culture. But it is clearly, it's things have been going. I mean, things have been going downhill ever since 2014, I would say, since Modi has been in power. I mean, this man, looking at his history, has blood on his hands already. And he won't really, think of the consequences of an all-out war with Pakistan. He really does not care about his own people, not just Pakistanis. I mean, this is the man who ordered a pogrom of the Muslims of Gujarat in 2002, if you might have read about it.
I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit, BJ, about what happened with Imran Khan, who is the subject of your book, because I suppose a lot of outsiders saw him as potentially a moderating figure in Pakistani politics and a figure of hope, but he's now in jail, and the Sharif brothers are in charge again in alliance with the military. What's actually the real story there?
Freddy, Imran, I mean, he had his own issues with in politics. A very popular leader, and to many people, a very honest man. He rose to popularity on purely on merit, but although there are versions that say that he was supported by the military, which is also true, but they did not have to do much because the man had charisma and he had street support. So he came to power in 2018 and clearly supported by the military, because anything happens in our politics cannot be without the support of the military establishment. But 3 years, 4 years down, his competitors, the Sharif family, they're to be honest, icons of corruption. The Sharif family or the Bhuttos, I mean, they have this reputation of fleecing the national kitty, and they've been fighting cases in the courts, and the cases have been going on for decades upon decades. So Imran took them on, and it's an old fight. This has been going on between these two political parties. But I'm not saying I'm exonerating Imran, but he's made some mistakes. He's not a very diplomatic figure. He's too blunt for Pakistan's politics. He's surrounded by people who might not be loyal to the country. They might be loyal to their own enterprises or their own businesses, or might have underdealings with his competitors. So it's Pakistan's politics is a big mess. So Imran was caught in the noose of it all, and there were cases pending against him. Primarily, it was there were bigger forces at play. People believe that he was in Russia when the war on when the Russians invaded Ukraine. So he clearly was drifting away from U.S. control, falling into the hands of the Chinese and the Russians, which annoyed Biden's administration, and so that was it. And there were cases against him, inconclusive evidence. He was rounded up. His party was. The military started picking up his, the more vocal members of his party and started, putting them in jail. Now, as we speak, the party is pretty much crushed. And Imran has been in jail fighting the same cases for the last 2 years. We still don't know whether those, the exact truth, but there are 2 or 3 cases against him which await, decision. And right now there's a lot of his career is shrouded in fog, in mystery. But considering the way things are going ahead right now with India, you never know. There are also talks that there are backdoor people, generals on through other channels. People have been reaching out to Imran through backdoor channels, and there might be a deal. But there are also reports that Imran is a very stubborn character, and he's not cut out for any deal. So we don't really know as of now what's his future.
But am I right in saying Imran Khan's approach to India was perhaps less belligerent? I think he was critical of India, but not as aggressive as the head of the army is now, or the Sharif brothers.
I agree, because 6 years ago, there was in 2019, India responded to a deadly attack on its security personnel in Pulwama, which is a town in Kashmir, with airstrikes on Pakistani territory. And this was when Imran was in power. An all-out war might have ensued were it not for US and Arab mediation, and Imran was being very sensible. So he did not. There was a prisoner. There was an Indian Air Force pilot who was taken in prisoner, and he was, respectfully handed back to India. So several years earlier, an attack on an Indian military base in Kashmir triggered a round of hostilities. So this has been going on for 10 years. Yes, I agree. Imran was more focused on the local economy, and to be honest, he had 3 years. In 3.5 years, 2 years were taken completely gobbled up by COVID. So he did not have much time to attack India. There were, of course, an exchange of jibes and a lot of jibes and diplomatic leg pulling with Indian authorities. But other than that, of course, an all-out war. On so many occasions, speaking to the press locally and both international press, he made it clear that they cannot afford war.
Pakistan is, as I said in the beginning, a nuclear power, and that is why, obviously, this conflict has the potential to become apocalyptic. What do you hear in Islamabad? What do you hear about the possible limit on Pakistan's response?
Well, as of now, the army has deployed all its troops across the line of control, which is the Indian, which is the line of control. As you know, it's the point, it's the border between, it's the mark that separates the Indian administered Kashmir with Pakistan administered Kashmir. As I reported earlier, Pakistan has already shot down 5 Indian aircrafts, and there has been intermittent shelling across the line of control into heavy firing both ways. The fear is that this might escalate. A nuclear war can. I don't think it is imminent, but I cannot rule it out. Considering that these both these considering the leadership of India, so. It cannot be ruled out, and it's a very scary situation, Freddy. Both nuclear armed neighbors, and but sanity must prevail, because both these countries, Modi must know, and even the Sharifs must know, that both these countries are home to large swathes of poverty-stricken populations. India might be a big economic power, but it hasn't done well enough to translate that economic success into genuine socio-economic success. So it cannot afford a nuclear conflict. It is the 5th largest economy in the world. To have a nuclear conflict will take it back 5-6 decades. So both these countries with large poverty populations, and both have very little to guard themselves against the fallout of any military misadventure. And that is what I think. That is what I think in terms of a sane person. But the thinking of the leadership right now, I don't know. I can't speak for them, but looking at the Indian aggression, this can go anywhere. I guess we'll have to just wait for another week or another few days to see where it all leads to.
And finally, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Zaya Yusuf join Michael Gove and the politics team to unpack the local elections. To unlock the whole video, you need to subscribe to the magazine by clicking the link below. Here's a taster of the discussion.
And welcome to Coffee House Shots Live, the local elections shake-up. I'm absolutely delighted that we have Zia Yusuf, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Lucy Dunn, and James Heale with me in order to dissect what are probably the most significant local election results that we've seen for years. I'm also delighted that all of you are here as well, because after we've had our discussion on stage, I want to invite questions from the audience so that you have an opportunity to dig even deeper into our panel's reflections on what happened last week and what its consequences are for our politics. I also want to thank our partners who sponsored this evening, Charles Stanley Wealth Managers, and in particular, I'd like to thank Charles Stanley, not just for their sponsorship of this event, but their continued sponsorship of so many Spectator events that bring political debate direct to you, our readers and subscribers. And we're also looking forward to welcoming lucky winners of the Spectator competition who have won the chance after this event ends to come back to the Spectator offices in 22 Old Queen Street for a drinks reception courtesy of Charles Stanley. I'm going to begin by asking James, as Deputy Political Editor, just to analyse for us the scale of what happened last Thursday. In tomorrow's edition of The Spectator, James's column looks at how reform won and what this might mean for our country and for the other political parties. James, how momentous do you think those results were?
I think these have been a very important set of local elections because, and you talk to some of the minor parties across the spectrum, it's all been about the phrase breaking the habit. So breaking Britain's addiction, perhaps, or tradition of voting for the two-party system. And what we saw last week, I think, was important because previously, Nigel Farage's political vehicles have all focused mostly on a single cause. So first it was UKIP, then it was the Brexit Party, and now it's reform. And so this was the sense, perhaps, that you could have Farage confined to one issue, you deal with that issue, and he was going to be done. What we saw last week was a much more sort of wholesome sort of critique of Britain, the economy, the state, how it's all going. And what we saw was finally, according to the BBC National projected vote share, Reform hitting 30% of the vote, Labour on 20%, and the Conservatives down in fourth on 15%. So what we saw was a really important breakthrough. And what we saw was Reform doing much better than sort of UKIP did at their height in, say, 2013, when they were getting 23% of the vote across the country. We saw a much more professional operation. We saw the winning places of the country polling very well that they hadn't either campaigned in, such as Gloucestershire, coming second there, or, for instance, doing very well in Merseyside as well, which is an area where sort of non-Labour parties have always struggled with. So I think the Reform did very well, but we can obviously ask the man himself here, Zia Yusuf, the party chairman. But I'd also want to mention, as my sort of role sometimes as the Liberal Democrat correspondent of The Spectator, Sir Ed Davies' party, because for the very first time, the Liberal Democrats came second in election for council elections across England. So the Reform got 677 councillors, clearly won that, but also the Lib Dems got 370 councillors, more than the Conservatives on 319. And I think this is important because I think you're suddenly seeing the Liberal Democrats, as David's been saying quite bullishly, being presented as a real alternative. And if you can give an example of how the Lib Dems and Reform did very well in this election, you'd only look, for instance, at Kent and Durham. You think Kent, you think Southern Tory, the home of Middle England, and obviously Durham, the tradition of the Labour Party, run by Labour for 100 years until 2021. In both of those now, Reform is the main party in control, and the Liberal Democrats are second. And that, I think, shows very much how the two-party system is under threat, how well Reform did, and sort of going under the radar, perhaps, is the Lib Dems. But I would only say that The Spectator does make a difference in its coverage, because we got asked on Saturday, the Today programme asked the education spokesman, Munira Wilson, what she made of her party being the party of the Bowden Belt. And she had to come up with some lines about sort of what it means to be the party of the posh. So that was something we came up with on that. But I think it was a very important set of elections, and I think it's going to be a preview of what we can expect over the next few years as we enter the age of 4 or even 5 party politics.
Thank you, James. Zia, the first thing that we have to say is congratulations. It's a remarkable achievement for Reform, for a party that didn't exist in this form just 2 years ago. We'll discuss what the ramifications are more broadly for British politics, but obviously sometimes people in studying local elections overlook the fact that councillors having been elected, there are services that they're going to deliver, administrations that they're going to lead. What can people in Durham, in Kent, and in all of the 10 local authority areas where Reform are now in charge, what can they expect from Reform councillors?
Well, firstly, Michael, thank you for the congratulations, but they are best not directed at me, but to our awesome candidates, over 1,600 of whom fought great campaigns. We won 677 seats across this great country. The congratulations go to our volunteers and our branches and our grassroots who have done so much, and obviously our MPs and Nigel, who led from the front. In terms of how we look forward now, and by the way, I also want to just address James's comment about how important these local elections were. I think they were the most important set of local elections in the history of this country, because they proved that the century-long stranglehold that what we call the two old parties have had on British politics has now been decisively broken. We take very seriously the business of governance. We have, as we speak, our councillors are choosing their leaders. They're doing that freely and of their own volition, as you would expect. And we're going to govern in a very different way. We've been very clear about what we wanted to do in local government. We never claimed to be miracle workers, but we did believe that there was waste. So, as Nigel said, if you are a DEI officer, or if you have a sneakily slightly different job title to protect you from FOI requests, you probably should potentially start looking for new work. We're going to resist, emphasis on the word resist, planning applications to turn HMOs into accommodation for illegal migrants, likewise hotels, to the degree that people are trying to turn them into what are effectively hostels. You can expect our team of lawyers to work with our councils to launch legal action to resist that. We're also going to work really hard to ensure that the millions of pounds currently being spent by councils across this country, ostensibly on not fixing potholes, to actually start delivering on fixing some potholes. We're going to, in areas like Lincolnshire, we're going to work hard to ensure that massive areas of green belt are not turned into solar farms against the will of local residents. Nothing against solar, by the way, in the sense that if somebody wants to put solar panels on their private homes, cool, without being subsidized by working people, no issue at all. But it's not acceptable that Madid Miliband gets to reshape what we consider our green belt because of his net zero religion. And we're also going to look very carefully at procurement. And this is not a quick win, but I think that most of the problems that ail this country, if you keep asking why, you end up in a place where it's because procurement is done catastrophically poorly. And so we're going to work very hard on that matter as well. I think I personally spent a lot of time looking at the thousands of FOI responses that we got to the thousands of requests that our team put in this year. And it's very hard getting real answers because it's like getting blood out of a stone. But it's clear that multi-million-pound contracts are being awarded by councils, now that we're in control of, without any real competition, where there's only one bidder. And there's nothing about that that's remotely acceptable. So one principle we will look to uphold in our reform-controlled councils is we will look to spend taxpayer money in the same way we would spend our own. And if you were going to get your driveway done, if you were going to get some work done in your garden, or put a loft extension in, you wouldn't just get one bid. You'd probably get more than one. And so those are these sort of common sense initiatives that we are launching. You'd have probably seen an initiative around the flag, so you'll see a multitude of our councils, probably in their first council meetings, resolved to ensure that, the flags of foreign countries or around many other woke causes are no longer permitted to be flown on council premises. I think that's a very reasonable position. So look, we're going to take a very common sense approach to local governance. We're very excited about, I've had calls now, Zoom calls with every single group of winning councillors. We're going to bring, interestingly, we're actually bringing all of our winning councillors to this very room next Sunday in our inaugural Centre of Excellence for Councillors meeting. Most of our councillors have no prior experience in elected office. We view that as a good thing, as Trump says, a good thing, not a bad thing, on the basis that they've had no hand in the damage that is caused by the previous incumbent. But we're very excited about what we're going to achieve for the British people. And I'll say this too, that we are well aware that the levers of power held by local government pale in comparison to the ones held in Westminster. Obviously, our ambition is for Nigel to get the keys to number 10 Downing Street and for us to have 350 to 400 Reform MPs in 2029. We will pull those levers of power that are available to us with all of our might in the direction of patriotism, in the direction of listening to our constituents. Frankly, in light of the news today now about the India trade deal and what's happening now with NI, running every decision we make through the lens of what is in the best interests of our constituents, which is actually frankly, I think, quite revolutionary prospect, given the way this country and local communities have been governed over the last 2 decades.
We'll come back to some of those questions, including the India trade deal, very current in a moment. But I wanted to turn to Jacob now. And Jacob, just ask you, why do you think the local election results were as they were? And what advice would you give to colleagues in the Conservative Party about how to respond?
Well, I think the local elections were clearly on national issues rather than local issues. I don't think people were voting because they thought their local councillor in an individual ward was good or bad. I think they were voting on the national scene. And the national scene was, by the last general election, and has been confirmed since the general election, that whoever you vote for, you get much the same thing. That actually the budget we did, our last budget, could broadly have been done by Rachel Reeves, and that the Green agenda has unchanged. I mean, Miliband's going a bit further than we went, but not much. The renters reform stuff that you were doing, which I loathed, I'm sorry to tell you, was being pushed ahead with socialist enthusiasm by the new government. And people looked at us and looked at Labour and thought, well, it doesn't make a lot of difference. And I think that's been a real problem. I think it's very hard for a new leader to suddenly change that, because we've had this feeling of, and Nigel has put this very well, of a uni-party. And if you look at what's happening, not just in this country, but in America, people are absolutely fed up with the business as usual. They're fed up with the feeling that however you vote, it doesn't change things. And they've now voted in a way that they think will change things. Now, it won't actually, because as Zia was very sensibly pointing out, most of the levers of power in Westminster are not in local government. So yes, they can change the flags, but an awful lot of the duties of local councils are statutory duties that they have to carry out. Regrettably, they won't be able to get rid of as much DEI as I would like them to, because they have, as a public body, the public sector equalities duty. That's laid down in law. They'll be endlessly taken to court if they don't follow it. So there's not going to be a big change on how we're governed immediately because of this, but it is a reflection of the deep fed-upness of the electorate, and to my mind, understandable fed-upness. What advice would I give? The advice I would give to the Conservative Party is to be conservative and get back to what we're meant to do, which is to be on the side of the people who vote for us. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you take net zero has given us the most expensive energy in Europe, particularly electricity prices. Our industrial electricity is 4 times the cost of energy in the United States. This is making people cold and poor. Why on earth were we going along with that? It's crazy policy, and it makes no difference to the world anyway, because we're only 0.9% of emissions. We went along with the fashionable internationalist view of the world and accepted that for too long at the cost of our constituents. And that was fine in its way when everyone was prosperous. Once the economic climate became more difficult, that changed. We also have gone along with a lot of woke sensibilities. But just think how cautious we were when we were in government over Black Lives Matter, which was all absolute nonsense. It was nothing to do with the UK. It was an American issue to do with American policing, and we were tiptoeing around it as if it had something to do with the United Kingdom. It didn't. And Colston Gay's statue was, not Colston Gay, who's a friend of mine, wrong, the Colston statue was pulled down, the statue in Bristol. Colston statue was pulled down, and the law wasn't enforced properly to stop it. It was absolutely feeble, and we were in charge, and people thought, this just isn't good enough. So we need to be conservative, we need to stand up for what we believe in, we need to stand up for the country, for the success of Britain, for our amazing historical achievements, and we need to stand up making people better off. And then I think people may begin to listen to us again.
Many of the points that you make, I sense Zia would have agreed with, and might even say had been articulated more strongly or more clearly in the last couple of years by Nigel Farage. What would you say to someone who say, Jacob, I absolutely trust you, and I'd love to have you in Parliament again, but many of your colleagues, you just alluded to some of the lefty policies followed by Michael Gove, many of your colleagues...
Sorry about
that. No. Many of, quite right, many of your colleagues, deserve actually slightly longer to, reflect and think on their errors. Given everything you've said, we're going to give reform a go, because as you yourself said, reform can change some things in local government, but we can only get real change if there's change at Westminster, and that's the biggest change that we can see.
Yes, I think, and Zia will have to disagree with me, but we need to get a collaboration between the Conservatives and Reform, and we as Conservatives have to recognise that these elections were a huge victory for conservatism, but not for the Conservative Party. They were a victory for views that Conservatives hold. And I don't buy into James's analysis so much on the Lib Dems, because what did well for the Lib Dems is where they came through, where the Tories and Reform split the vote. That was the main thing. The Lib Dem vote, and it depends who you believe, and different people give different percentages for these elections, but the BBC, which we will normally not quote as a source of authority, but on this occasion I will, the BBC says that what they got in 2021 and 2025 was the same national percentage share. It wasn't a big rise in Lib Demery, it was a big fall in conservatism. And that's really important because that shows...
If you're watching this, then it means you'll no longer be able to listen to myself, James Heale, Michael Gove, Zia Yusuf and Jacob Rees Mogg have this discussion. It's a subscriber-only event, and so you'll have to go to spectator.co.uk/live and sign in with your Spectator email address. If you're not a subscriber, then what are you waiting for? For just £3, you will be able to get full access to this and other live stream events, as well as the Coffee House website, the app, our daily newsletters, our daily podcasts and video content. So for just £3, subscribe now.
That's all for this week. Subscribe and tap the bell to make sure you never miss a new episode. Until next time.